Hello, my name is Sadie Berlin, and I am the curator of Rev-elations, part of the Meighen Forum. Rev-elations is a series highlighting older and hidden gems penned by Black playwrights. I would like to thank the Stratford Festival for asking Be Current Performing Arts, the company of which I am the artistic director, to partner with us on this endeavor. Every play discussed in these four reflections are a companion piece to the dramatized readings we will be presenting at the Lazaridis Hall of the Tom Patterson Theatre between the 25th and the 28th of August 2021. If you are unable to join us in person, you can still enjoy these conversations with us. Thank you. Hello. Thank you for joining us again today. And today we are talking about Zola Neale Hurston with Jordan Laffrenier. And Jordan, for the audience members who have not listened to the conversation about the escape, and who I'm sure will run to hear it after hearing your amazing thoughts on this on the subject of Zola Neale Hurston, can you briefly reintroduce yourself?
Hi everyone, I am Jordan Laffrenier. I am a director and dramaturg based in Toronto.
Thank you. And so we began with William Wells Brown in slavery, and now we move on to the Harlem Renaissance, which come as a result of the Great Migration. And we will talk about that later. And I'm just going to say a few notes about Hurston's life, and then loop in Jordan into the conversation. Zola Neale Hurston was born in 1891 and died in 1960. In our conversation about William Wells Brown, we saw that he had all of the jobs and did all of the things and lived everywhere. And Hurston also had an amazingly varied life, not just for her literary output, but she was she did a number of types of writing. She was a novelist, she was a playwright, and she was also an anthropologist and a filmmaker. Now, Hurston is better known for her novel, Their Eyes Were Watching God. It is widely studied in high schools and universities. And Zola was also a very accomplished playwright, which I found out recently. The quality of her short plays we will be presenting at the Tom Patterson is just astounding. And it's important to know that because writing short plays is not easy, and these are pure gems.
I think one of the things that I find really striking about Zola is one, that we can call her Zola. She's one of the few writers that we refer to on a first name basis. And two, that she died penniless. She died with no money, and she had quite an incredible career. As you were saying, Sadie, she grew up in Eatonville. She came to New York during the height of the Harlem Renaissance. She hung out with, really incredible writers like Langston Hughes and W.E.B. Du Bois. But when she died with no money. And I think one of the things that I think about quite extensively is how we take care of our cultural people, our cultural writers, and how we take care of the people who do so much work to take care of the culture. I've been engaging in with Alice Walker's work quite a bit since engaging with Zola's work, and Alice Walker loves Zora Neale Hurston and writes about her quite extensively. And I think there's maybe a parallel to be drawn in the way that Alice Walker writes about Zora Neale Hurston and Virginia Woolf writes about Shakespeare's sister. Shakespeare never actually had a sister. So this woman that Virginia Woolf puts on such a pedestal never really existed. And Alice Walker takes this great migration in a way and goes and visits, digs up Zora Neale Hurston's grave and starts to engage with her writing and engage with her career. Zora wasn't really respected by a lot of I think at points she was, but I think at a lot of times she wasn't as respected as she should have been by her male colleagues. Richard Wright, who wrote Black Boy, one of my favorite books, wrote about her. Miss Hurston seems to have no desire at all to move towards serious fiction. She can write, but her prose is clocked in that facile sensuality that has dogged Negro expression since the days of Alice Wheatley. Her characters eat and laugh and cry and work and kill. They swing in that orbit where America likes to see the Negro live, between laughter and tears. And Rev-elation, who wrote The Invisible Man, another one of my favorite books, said her work was calculated burlesque. I think she came to Harlem, as I said, in the height of the Harlem Renaissance. And during the Harlem Renaissance, there was this big boom of wanting of a Black middle class that a lot of Black writers really wanted to engage with and present for themselves. There was this idea of the new Negro and the Negro that we should be presenting. One of my favorite depictions of the Harlem Renaissance is this photo, and I'm just like racking my brain trying to remember the name of the artist, but it's this photo of this Black couple, and they're both wearing these like raccoon fur, and they're standing in front of a Cadillac. And I think, what I love about that photo is it so demonstrates how Blacks wanted to be depicted at that time. And Zora Neale Hurston was doing something really different. She wasn't trying to depict this version of a new Negro. She was trying to depict Black life how she saw it growing up in Eatonville. Eatonville was an entirely Black community, and she was trying to capture that language and that presence of a common Black person, not a Black person that many people were considering excellent at that point. And I think because of that, writers like W.E.B. Du Bois, criticized her, and Richard Wright criticized her, and I think unjustly so. And I think, I think the question that I'm trying to tie back to is, do you think that we should be taking better care of the people who take care of our culture?
Well, the answer is of course, and I think that it's really important. It's very interesting to note that Hurston was not read for many decades, and I think it is because she wrote in vernacular,
Mm-hmm.
and I think that Black people were ashamed of that, which is a very complex thing to think about in terms of the Harlem Renaissance, because it is called a Renaissance. Going back to the Afro-American roots would involve the vernacular, but also I think that there was also a great push to assert the fact that Black people were capable of intellectuality, capable of elegance under the parameters of what whites might find elegant. I'm not sure. But it's also important to note that very often people were there was this saying called "a Black man's house is his Cadillac," and that was and that has a lot to do with redlining and the fact that I mean, of course, people in Harlem own their own homes, but across the country, if you were Black, you often could not own your home, and you would then buy a car instead. And I want to talk a little bit about the Great Migration, just in case people
Yeah.
need to be situated with that, right? So the Great Migration, it refers to a number that is about 6 million African Americans who leave the rural South to move to other parts of the US between 1918 and 1970. It's a movement that really captures the collective imagination. And so I do you know what Hurston's place was in it, or if she went to bars and so on? What did she do during that time of her life in New York?
I mean, she also wrote novels, and she worked a lot. She worked really extensively in the theater. I think that's one thing that's overlooked. She formed her own theater company that was for Black people and for the Black common person, which WEB also did. And she kind of always was, probably they didn't have a word for it then, but was always working as a dramaturg. As you were talking about the Harlem Renaissance, one of the painters that kind of came to my mind was Archibald Motley and his depictions of the Harlem Renaissance. Like they're always so colorful and so vibrant. Yeah, you can kind of imagine just what the zeitgeist of that community would be like. And I think, as you were saying, the Harlem Renaissance was directly came out of the Great Migration. A lot of the people that were living in the Harlem Renaissance or living in Harlem during this Renaissance period were born into slavery or had parents or grandparents that were slaves. And so I think that memory was very present for them. And we were talking a little bit earlier about uh, the way they dressed and the fashion of the Harlem Renaissance. And I think a part of that came out of growing up in a poverty that we couldn't, neither of us could ever imagine. And it's kind of the feeling of probably wanting to get what was theirs to some degree, but also the feeling of not wanting to be affiliated with that in any way. I'm curious. You mentioned earlier that you feel like this series is, in some ways, a way of taking care of the culture, and I'm curious if you could talk a little bit more about that, Sadie.
Well, in my work in the last 2 years at the festival, and now I do some programming in my new role in at Be Current. Um, when we ask for submissions, we often get submissions from people of color who want to write an adaptation of Shakespeare. I wanted to give Black playwrights the opportunity to adapt Black work in the public domain. Because this is a big issue. When you start as a playwright, you don't have, well, first of all, as a young playwright, I would never have known how to acquire the rights for a play. Of course, there's the issue of money. And so many young playwrights who want to adapt work have to adapt white work because Black work is not, most of the Black work we have is too recent and not in the public domain. And we love those plays. Absolutely. This is not the point that I'm trying to make. But when I was asking around people the oldest Black play that they knew that was Canadian, they would say Janet Sears. And Janet Sears' first play was produced in 1987. It was to give material to Black playwrights who want to write adaptations, and also to provide a greater historical context for playwriting. Because as a Black Canadian who writes plays, what history what's my canon? The Black canon is almost exclusively again African American, but even then I would imagine that most Black Canadian theater artists have not heard of William Wells Brown, and they might not know that Hurston has written plays. And the two other playwrights, Frantz Fanon and Laurence Elliott, well, Frantz Fanon's plays were translated into English for the first time a few weeks before I found out about him. And Laurence Elliott's play came to me from the Black Theater Workshop, which was a scan of what had been lovingly typed on an old typewriter. It's very obvious when you look at the text. How do you write a play if you about your culture, or even if it's not about your culture, you are of a culture, and you write a play without a canon behind you? That can be, I think, probably very liberating. Yes, writing with the ability to have access to the context of your culture on the north end of Turtle Island, I think that is really valuable. And I'm actually going to be continuing working with other Black companies to create an archive of older Black work. And we are going to be, you know, giving them, putting those playwrights in the spotlight. It is important to understand what the members of our race have done before us. And I can give you the example of Hidden Figures. I just spent watching. I did not read the book, but when the movie came out, I went to see it. And when I was a child, I was a math wizard, and I loved science. And I guess I gravitated towards the arts because I didn't think that there was a place for me in science. And I don't think that it is a coincidence that I had never heard of these women. I mean, these women are responsible for putting American astronauts into orbit and for putting Americans on the moon. And I heard about them for the first time 3 or 4 years ago. I don't want Black playwrights in Canada not to have. They need to know they need to find their Katherine Johnson.
That makes so much sense. And I think this is where, without appropriating, I would really challenge professors of theater and professors of English to start incorporating more works by people of color into their curriculums, because, I mean, for very obvious reasons, but also, I was thinking the other day, I have a minor in English, and my main degree is in theater, but there were so few writers of color that I read in any of my English courses. And I took so many English courses, and there were so few, like to the extent that there'd be one writer of color, not one Black writer, one writer of color. Usually it was Ruby that we would read. And there are so many works by people of color out there. Like, some of them you have to uncover, but there are so many works by people of color. And why is it that in a course where I'm reading, 20 different works, why is 5% of it dedicated to, 50% of our population? I think that's problematic in itself. And I think part of the purpose of colleges and universities is to be research centers. And I think if these professors are not doing the research that is needed to teach their classes in a way that reflects and adds to our time, that's a problem. I feel like, we leave these schools and we only know a portion of the work that we should know, and then it becomes on us for some reason to have to uncover it ourselves. And I think it's great that you're doing the work, and I think that the work that you're doing should extend so much further, and it shouldn't just be on people of color to uncover. I also think it's really fascinating that in schools, a lot of the people of color that are taught tend to be the who they would call the peacekeepers, and we learn about them in a way that we only learn about their peaceful side. We don't learn about their more angry side a lot of the time. And I'm thinking very specifically about Martin Luther King, but it's interesting. I find it very fascinating, especially right now in this moment that I think has made so many people so angry, that the things that the people that we keep returning to and the ways that we return to them are centered around their policies and their ideas around peace, but not centered around their policies and their ideas around revolution and how change is made. And I think, as you say, I think it's political in the fact that it's an erasure, but I think it's political in a way that it also is made to keep us calm. And being in an English degree in a school in Canada right now, and certainly when I was in school, is very lonely, because you are one of maybe two people of color in the class, and you are also reading only white people. And so not only are the people around you not experiencing the thing that you're experiencing, you're not reading people who are experiencing the thing that you're experiencing. I loved the opportunity to read Zola Neale Hurston because I felt like I could feel myself so tied in her life, and I could understand where she was coming from, and I could understand the things that she was rejecting in her work. And I wish that I read her in school, because I think I would have felt less alone.
Now, before we close this discussion, I wanted to ask you about the plays. Now, when we can't talk about them all because there's six of them, and they fulfill very different roles. But I was wondering if you could talk about one or two of them that you like to give a little taste to the audience who's going to come and see the reading series.
I'll talk about Filling Station, because I think it was the first play on the list. Filling Station is about a Ford driver and a Chevrolet driver who get into an argument at a gas station, and they're both black men. It's a really comedic play in that they end up, one is from Georgia and one is from Alabama, and they end up in this argument about which place is more racist, both trying to point to the other's state as the more racist state. And it's just like it's this like series of one-upping, and they both are agreeing with each other, but then coming back with like this greater one-up. And yeah, I think a lot of her work is really funny, and I think it's not funny in the way that can be sad. I think it's just funny in the way that it's really just fun and funny.
It almost feels like a reversal in a way, because these two men argue about who has the best car, and then they argue about who has the best whites, and that and I appreciate the commodification that I see a link in the commodification between the car and the whites, and that just tickled me. So, filling station is just about two men having a chat while filling their tanks, and somehow it's great, and it evokes so many things, and it is so rich and layered. But there are things in there like the Sermon in the Valley, which takes place in a church. Bahamas is about two Harmelites who travel to the Bahamas with someone called Emperor Jones to travel to Africa to expel the European powers with his conquering Black legions. And so there's just such an array of topics there, and I just admire her confidence.
Yeah, I think the quality of the writing is excellent. I also really like her short stories. Her short stories are really great. But yeah, she's an excellent writer, and I think one of the really cool things about this play, or this series of plays, they mostly come from her collection called Keener. They're snapshots of life. Like, you get these little fragments, and I think, you know, with her growing up in an all-Black community, most of the plays only have Black people in them, which I also think is really cool. But yes, I think that it's a great follow-up to his work, because his work is obviously, we're focusing on one work by him, and there are white characters as well as Black characters, and it also takes place just after, this is a follow-up to the events that took place in slavery. So in a way, it feels like we're doing this journey through Black American history, but through these plays. I'm really excited for this series. I think that it's going to be awesome, and I think for the people that get to experience it live and in person, I think it'll be especially something to witness. I think you pulled together a collection of plays that are all quite diverse, and yeah, I think we're witnessing through these plays a bit of a cultural touch point, and yeah, I think that should be celebrated.
Absolutely. And thank you so much for agreeing to direct the first two nights, which is The Escape by William Wells Brown and 6 short plays by Zola Neale Hurston. And I invite everybody who's watching to come and see it. Thank you, Jordan.